Welcome back to a podcast to answer your questions on addiction, recovery, and mental health by Wiseman Method opioid treatment specialists. I'm your co-host, Dwight Hurst, and I'm joined as always by Claire Wiseman and David Livingston. I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion to have. Our question that we're addressing today is, do I need to abstain from all addictive substances to be clean? And this would include what sometimes I've seen people call these soft addictions, which is an interesting, we probably need to get into what that is, but things like use of caffeine or smoking is oftentimes what people are talking about when they say this. If I'm getting off of drugs or if an alcohol problem, do I also need to be clean from other things? Or if I had a problem with painkillers, should I automatically assume that I should abstain from alcohol to be healthy and sober? This question comes up a lot, and there's very strong opinions and feelings people have on it. And so I'm excited to talk about it today and see what you guys think.
Well, I will start with the term to be clean. I think that's not a good term at all to be used. And I think that's where, a lot of the confusion lies. Because you are using a mood-altering substance doesn't mean you're a dirty person.
Aha. That's a good point.
One of the major issues of the question is the word or the term to be clean. I think when somebody's using a substance does not mean they're dirty. It just means they're using the substance. So the other issue that I see is when people use substances is what they're using that for. What's the goal? And it's really important to understand that because when they come off those substances and they are fully detox, if they use other altering substance, what is the reason they're using it? And I think in life, it's really important, not what we do, but the reasons why we're doing it. I think that's much more important than the act itself. Mm-hmm. So if they are using, mood-altering substance to, self-medicate negative emotions, now there's an issue.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's important to understand why they started using those substances in first place and why they are using the other ones as well. But with that said, I'm going to let David get deep into it.
Or before I go, what are your thoughts on it?
I really like the clarification of terms when we talk about that. I think that becomes a big problem. There almost becomes something so vague about the concept of clean versus and I like what you say there. Does that mean, because we use the term dirty, then if someone has that sounds like someone who's taking a urinalysis test or something. Well, you were dirty, so you're in trouble. So right away we've set up that paradigm, right? So I really like sort of looking at that and saying, what is it about this term? There's no such thing as like a magic status of clean, or for that matter, sober. We have to know what we're talking about. I worked in a treatment facility once where my boss he even cautioned us about the term recovery. He said, when people talk about being in recovery, he's like, we need to make sure that everybody knows what they mean for their own healing from their own condition. And because once again, sometimes that became just an idea of, are you in recovery? Are you really in recovery? And is your recovery as good as my recovery? And it would get thrown around sometimes that we'd forget to stop and say, what the hell does recovery mean? What does that mean? What is our goal for our health? And sometimes we forget
that's the whole point. Wouldn't it be great if everybody could say, I am proceeding with a healthier lifestyle than saying I'm in recovery? Such negative connections to those words. There's such stigma to those words. There's such expectations. So if people are just healthier and living a healthier style based on their specific needs instead of, having to fall into this bubble that doesn't fit everybody, I think it would be easier for people, A, to seek help, and B, to sustain it.
It's easy for any of us to overestimate or underestimate things. And I think that, the evolution of treatment has been in some ways to get people's attention. I also think there's been generally I think because maybe the way it first began to evolve through AA a long time ago, there was a lot of denial and it wasn't really talked about and written about. And so there was a kind of a confrontive process that was initially meant to kind of push people out of the idea that everything was okay, and and help them sort of really think about what was healthy or not healthy for them, and strong words like addict and recovery and clean and so forth were brought into, and sometimes being strong and confrontive is what people need, because they are they're leaning whatever ambivalence they have is leaning too far in one direction or another. And so, and while there's always ambivalence, right? There's, people like things and don't like things often simultaneously, including whatever substance they might be struggling with. It's far better to get to know both sides of it and then really begin to sort of understand what is possible and what works. And in my experience, people will tell you, like, have you ever had a problem with alcohol? No, I don't really like it that much. I'll have a beer and half the time I don't even finish the beer. And so no, but opioids, I can't ever do. And I'm like, yeah, you can't ever do that again. But you know what, if you want to sit down and have a beer, you've never had a problem with it. Has that ever led you to anything else or doing anything that you're not comfortable with? No, I don't even like it that much. But every once in a while with a friend, I'll sit down and have one. I'm like, then that's fine. So it's you really have to people will tend to tell you, if they're, if they're working on themselves legitimately, they'll tell you what's possible and what's not. And they tend to know themselves pretty well. Usually it is better to be cautious, I think, in general, because there is some gray areas as you move forward. But I agree. I don't like the terminology, and like we talk about a lot on this podcast. All of this has to get parsed far more than it does.
Yeah, it's the discussion that you're talking about. It popped in my head as you were saying that people will tell you what they need, and I wonder how much of when we make a blanket statement about, you need to cut every psychoactive substance out of your life. You need to, if you ever had this problem, that means you'll eventually have this problem, and you can't ever drink a beer if you've ever had this problem, for everyone. And when we try to paint with a broad brush, do you think that comes from the assumption that someone going through addiction treatment is like up to something, or that they're like trying to get away with something? I mean, I feel like sometimes it's like we're trying to assume that the person isn't telling us the truth when they say what they want to work on. And that's something
I think that's part of
people think.
I'm sorry. I think that's part of the stigma, that those words and those terms carry. And that's why it's so important for us to get away from them. Is there's an assumption that a person that uses mood altering substance is a dishonest person. It's going to lie. It's going to manipulate. I mean, there's so many things that comes with it, and I believe also if there is a rules for keeping your sobriety that doesn't fit somebody's needs, you're completely disregarding the person as a person. So she becomes just a condition and not the person anymore. And that's a horrible place to be. And I think most people that we see and treat feel that way. They feel unheard. They feel unseen. And all people, when they look at them, they see the condition. Oh, he is an addict. He is suffering from addiction. But I think for us to get to a productive point in the addiction world, we're going to have to start looking at the individual and making, instead of assumptions, making rules that will fit, and not even rules, expecting what should be expected from that individual, and not from a set of rules that was written by somebody 20 years ago.
That understanding is the way to go, like the whole idea of addictive thinking, right? So when I think about it, I try to look at what part of that is true. Okay, so if someone is in a really compulsive place, you could say that they are in a state of addictive thinking, because when people are in a really compulsive, high anxiety kind of fight or flight reflex, they are in a compulsive state, and then they are going to not be able to necessarily have context and executive functioning working at the way they would be when they're not in a compulsive state. Mm-hmm. So that's true for everybody, by the way, whether you suffer with substances or not. I mean, that's true with sleep deprivation and other things that move people into that fight or flight state. So it's a condition of the brain. But so when you're trying to figure out what's healthy for somebody, moving them into a place of understanding where they start to really begin to understand themselves, and then the what you want them to be able to feel is more relaxed. So the more compassionate, the easier they are on themselves in one way, helps them relax, and the less chance they're going to go into an anxiety state or so if you push people and kind of tell them what to do or create, while the idea is you're creating a floor of sobriety and a floor that's going to support them, that's only true at times and only true to a certain extent. Okay, if it goes too far, it will have the opposite effect. So in a treatment, you're constantly going back and forth. Oh, you slept well. Okay, do more tonight, or exercise more today. Oh, you didn't sleep at all. Back off. Don't push yourself too much. So it's this constant movement back and forth. And then this gets internalized by people. And so over time, so they then know how to treat themselves better and ultimately keep themselves in a healthier state, which is why the kind of black and white thinking is has some validity at times, but is also really untrue at other times.
Yeah, it's interesting because by nature, a problem that has to do with compulsion and impulse control and addiction is a problem that sometimes our judgment is thrown off. And so that's where I think there's the black and white thinking would be, don't trust yourself because you have this problem and you can't judge your own use of anything. And so it's useful to get an outside perspective. But then on the other hand, that is not great advice, because you have to ultimately trust yourself to some extent, because you are the one that's living your own life. And so it's this fine line between don't get cocky, kind of, is what I'm hearing you saying. Like, don't just say, it doesn't matter, I can do whatever I want. Because you have had, the person has been going through a health problem related to impulse control and related to addiction. So don't over trust that I got this. But on the other hand, you do need to trust yourself to know what you need. So I guess, I mean, having a support system and real treatment professionals in your life according to your needs is probably a pretty big part of this, of evaluating this question for a person, right?
I think so as well. I think absolutely, but it's really important to look at the issue as a physiological issue. What David was talking about, brain chemistry, and not personality. So where the patient is, or where the person is at that point on, of stabilizing their brain chemistry, also makes a difference of, how able they are to make a decision of having a beer, or how fragile they are of not being able to have something that will mimic that numbing device of the other substance. So different times in our lives, we are able to sustain a lot more than others. So, we also see patients that at a moment that they had a oral surgery and they start taking opioids was the same time as they were having, they were going through a divorce or they lost somebody. So that medication at that time became harmful for them, where if they took it in another time in their lives, it wouldn't have been an issue. They would have taken for their oral surgery and just, put that behind them. So I think when we discussed, can somebody that just came off a drug use another substance, it's really important to know, where they are physiologically and, how strong they are or how able they are to make those decisions, and being able to limit themselves if needed.
The old school way of looking at it in like a lot of communities about recovery was to say, get off alcohol, get off drugs. But, smoking was always kind of winked at, kind of like, well, you can't get off of everything all at once. Does a soft addiction, or whatever you want to call it, is that just something society has said, hey, this isn't illegal, or you're not going to crash a car if you're smoking too much. So somehow it's okay. I guess, what's the determination for that? What do we think of the concept of a soft addiction?
I think mostly as society see it. I think when you smoke a cigarette or you have coffee, it doesn't really compromise your ability to think or make decisions. Where if you drink a lot or if you have, a lot of cocaine or opiates, it really enables you to make, at least safe decisions for yourself. It puts you in a riskier space, you and everybody else around you. So I think that's how, society views it and, selects it as soft addictions and not so soft. Is truly the ability to make decisions, make healthy decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we're always putting chemicals in our body. We're always, even water is a chemical. It's so like you're saying, I mean, we all know the potential harmful effects of smoking. And for some people, coffee isn't a big deal at all. And for other people, it can raise anxiety and other things, and their body doesn't do well with it. So, and in terms of some of the studies I've read about some of the softer addictions is, what they found with smoking, they used to think that you don't quit smoking when you're, if you're coming off something else because it's too much. But in the longer run, what they found, and that could be true like in the short term, but in the longer run, what they found was that actually, if somebody quit smoking along with another substance, maybe they did much better overall because what happens is that the better we take care of ourselves, the more we want to continue to take care of ourselves. It creates a positive momentum. I think that positive sense of I'm healthier and I want to stay healthier, I'm exercising, I'm doing these things. It creates a sense of well-being and tends to sort of drive people in a healthier direction. And I think that's the goal overall. Look, and the other thing is, and this gets tricky because when you suggest this, people can take this way too far. But I talk to patients about this because often they, when you talk about giving things up, they just look like, I've been bad and so I got to do this, I got to do that. But they're like, but you have to have something that changes your consciousness, that shifts how you feel at times. You need things to look forward to. And I think one of the problems with addictions in part is that people just get too lazy. And I don't know a better way to put it. And rather than going to a concert, going, uh, whatever you like to do with your friends, or going to a sporting event, or going to dinner with your family, or whatever it is that you enjoy doing, all of those things shift your consciousness. When you're around new people, and maybe you take a road trip in your car with a friend, these things all have a similar effect. And so we need things to look forward to. We can't just live in the same routine. We're meant to shift our consciousness in different ways. But when you just habituate to anything, a substance, you tend to lose that drive for those other things. And ultimately, it's funny because when you talk to someone who was sober and then they got on a substance, they will almost inevitably tell me that was the better time of my life. That was so much better, right? But it's for one reason or another they didn't sustain it. But that's why they're in treatment. They want to get back to that because it is better. It's better to have varied experiences.
It's interesting how you put that, the laziness of our own instincts. Because if we get into an addictive cycle and it's like I can ingest something, I can go and pour a drink a little quicker and easier maybe than I could organize my friends together for a game night, or then I could get my kid and run to the park and do something, or go for a jog, or those things take some coordination, but you're talking about all opening up and diversifying how we adjust our consciousness to make life more rich. And yeah,
that's it. That the goal is a more creative life, where those needs are getting met in a more varied way. It's not because the fear is that so I'm going to be a good boy or a good girl. I'm going to do the right things. But underneath that is the part of all of us that's like, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I want to, there's a wild man and a wild woman in everyone, and there should be. But you have to tame it. You have to understand there's limits to that part of you, so that you don't, mess up everything you've built. And the goal to that is a more creative life. Like you're saying, at first it's more work, but once you get in the routine of doing those things, it's actually just much better.
And
hello,
Claire, what were you going to say?
You guys there?
Yeah.
No. I thought I lost you guys.
Oh, no, we're here.
No, I think the only thing that, again, I go back to terms, is the word laziness. I think is more instead of laziness is trying to escape life. And I think that's one of the reasons why, a lot of people choose to, instead of going out to concerts and being with their friends, to stay in a room doing drugs. Is they can't handle whatever is out there, and they are truly using whatever drug or substance to escape life. So I don't know if it's easier to do what they're doing than to go out there and have fun. It's just what they're capable of in that minute.
And you know what? You make a good correction, because it often is. Sometimes it can be about that, but mostly it isn't. And sometimes people don't know what to do, and maybe they're lonely and they don't feel like they have friends to go and do some of the things we're talking about, or things in their life have sort of fallen apart. So, or they're struggling with resources to kind of do the things we're talking about. So it's far more complex, but worth building towards, and step by step. But you're right. It's the reasons for it are really varied.
Mm-hmm.
And again, is what we started the whole conversation in first place. Putting things in a recovery, or now they have here California sober. Is it good? Is it bad? It's you can't put everybody in the box and have an answer for every issue. Mm-hmm. Is looking at the person, is instead of being in recovery or staying clean, is working for your health, working and staying healthy physically and emotionally, whatever it is that you need to do. And everybody is different. And I think we hear a lot of that question from parents. Should they go after detox to a rehab? Should they stay at a sober living? What is the steps? And it's first understanding the patient, is hearing the person, is understanding where they're coming from to have an idea what's the best step forward. So I think especially in today's society, and I don't want to go there because that's a whole big can of worms, everybody's being put in a, where you are this or you are that. And if you're this, we don't accept you. And if you're that, we accept you. Mm-hmm. So I think we got to get away from labeling people as much as we can and understand, A, people change. B, our expectations might not be the right one for that other person. So what works for me, it might not work for somebody else. And the reasons why they're doing something, maybe I don't understand. So we need to get out of these boxes and, be more accepting and understanding of people without so many, exact terms and expectations.
Yeah, it seems like the real first step to answering a question like this for one's self, and I guess that's the real answer to start with. If someone was to say, do I personally, that's the first thing, is don't ask, does everyone need to? Do I personally need to cut out intoxicants from my life completely if I've had a problem with one form of addiction or one method of addiction? If someone's really trying to answer that for themselves, they need to have really what it sounds like is a good, honest conversation with themselves and maybe someone who knows them and cares about them and their doctor or therapist or some professional. Like, start talking about it is really the first thing to do. Mm-hmm. And as I think, something you mentioned, David, I think that's coming out here is that it's always good to be cautious, but I think there's a right. It's always good to be cautious when we've had a pre-existing condition of any kind. But I hope that what we're saying to people, I think, is that you should be conscious and cautious of a pre-existing condition of addiction, just the same way you would as any other pre-existing condition. If I've been pre-diabetic, I probably need to be cautious about what I eat, even if I'm not pre-diabetic anymore, or if I've skated that or whatever. That's a great example. But if I've had a heart attack, I need to question my activities a little bit differently and my diet a little bit differently. And this is really the same thing. It says, I know I have a pre-existing condition where I had opiate dependence problem, and so I probably should think hard about how I approach alcohol. That's way different than saying, oh, I'm this kind of person, so therefore I just can't even really think for myself about stuff.
That's right. And just to complicate it further, which is
awesome,
one of my favorite things to do. But it's also true. There are people who are really, really capable of putting the brakes on, and some people who are less capable of putting the brakes on, mm-hmm. and so you have to keep that vulnerability. You have to assess for that as well. And they'll tell you, right? No, I can't do that because if I do, this happens, this happens, this happens. It's always happened, and right. So okay. So and there are other people who it's their problems are more driven situationally rather than the fact that their repression barrier, which is really our ability to put the brakes on, isn't as strong as it is in other people. Okay, so they just tend to have trouble, pushing things down once they have a substance in them. That piece of them just isn't as strong. So so that's just. This is why you shouldn't walk in, and when you're talking with people with a lot of predetermined ideas, you should really walk in and listen and get to know them and spend some time, and if they trust you and they feel like you're not judging them and you really want to understand and help them, and there's a feeling of that type of rapport and authenticity in both people, they will tell you, and you'll get to know what's possible and what's not, and then you can begin to really get an accurate picture.
And that will do us for today. Thank you again for listening. As always, this podcast is here to answer your questions on addiction. And you always can join the conversation. You can follow us on Twitter @opiates or send us an email, info@opiates.com. Also, please use the hashtag #StopTheSilence to help to spread the word about the opioid overdose epidemic and all the tragedy that is happening with that in the U.S. and other places. Please tag us @opiates when you do so. If you'd like to share your stories or if you'd like to share your questions, it's another good way to do it. This show, as always, is brought to you by Wiseman Method Opioid Treatment Specialists and is produced by Popped Collar Productions. Our music is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. For Claire Wiseman and David Livingston, I've been Dwight Hurst. Thank you for sharing your questions and listening to us. Remember, keep asking questions. When you ask questions, you get answers. And when you can find answers, you can find hope. Bye-bye for today. We'll be back again soon.